Travel was one of the very first categories ever formally managed by procurement. It's what I like to call a mature category, which means we really should have well and truly have it under control by now. However, an eye-watering $1 trillion is spent on corporate travel every year. It is a category in which the scope has mushroomed to cover not just air travel, transport and accommodation, but also expense management technology, teleconferencing, events, the full end-to-end complexity of corporate travel. And nestled within that is the specific category of ground transportation. The transport industry has changed dramatically over the past 15 years. The number of daily corporate rides being booked has increased by 10% since 2010, while personal bookings have increased by 58%. It's a category notorious for its administrative burden, and therefore, for procurement professionals, it's a category ripe for disruption. As it stands currently, and as you well know, travel costs are about 10% of our total spend, but about 90% of the headache. In some cases, it takes approximately 10 minutes to process a single travel expense claim, and with an average of 7 receipts per person submitted per month, that's a lot of wasted time. By 2020, half of all these business trips will be done by employees expecting a B2C style user experience, online, on demand, seamless and consistent. Blanketed over the broad scope of this category travel is some very serious concerns: sustainability, employee safety and cybersecurity. And so today, and as you will well know, a corporate travel manager needs to concern themselves with a whole new set of factors, including employee safety, technology implementation, quality of service, sustainability, total cost optimization, and maverick spend. All this to manage, and we haven't even mentioned that how you pacify your CEO when they're bumped out of first class or their chauffeur doesn't turn up on time. In today's webinar, Rush Hour, High Risk, Hidden Costs and Unexpected Travel Spend, we'll be exploring the different aspects of how to manage the total cost of ownership within this complex emotional category. I'm Tanya Siri, founder of Procurious and today's webinar host. I'm also joined by Lena Margolin, VP Business Solutions Get UK, and Sasha Kalb, VP of Compliance and Risk for APAC, Global Partnerships and Alliances with American Express Global Business Travel. Lena leads all aspects of Get's corporate ground transportation technology and service, which is used by more than 18,000 organisations worldwide. Lena's expertise is in data analytics and how technology can deliver outstanding market-focused solutions. Sasha joined American Express Global Business Travel in 2014 as Vice President, Compliance and Risk for APAC. Prior to this role, Sasha worked at 3M, where she was the company's first APAC Compliance Counsel and built a brand as a trusted advisor who helped leaders grow their businesses in a compliant and sustainable manner. Welcome to both of you. We certainly have two experts on the line today. So, look, Sasha, following my very graphic introduction and given your senior role in one of the world's most comprehensive travel companies, could you please give everyone a general overview of the current state of business travel globally and how this has changed in recent years?
Sure, and thank you, Tanya. It's great to be part of this webinar today. So, as you alluded to, the global business travel landscape has evolved at rapid pace in recent years, driven by new and exciting technologies and shifts in business traveler expectations. To provide an overview of the current state of business travel, I'd like to start on a macro level. Global trade, one of the economic factors most correlated with travel, has retained momentum despite the increased focus on tariffs, but there's some indication it has softened. Despite the possible economic implications of the U.S.-China trade war or Brexit, the rate of business travel does remain steady. So with that said, what are we seeing in terms of trends? Well, again, as you alluded to, in the increasingly B2C world. We're seeing that corporate travelers expect the same type of technology to book and manage their business trips that is available for for leisure travel. And businesses are expecting to have access to data and technology to support their travelers while they're on the road and to be able to analyze their travel spend to drive savings. One of the biggest developments we're seeing in business is that the desire to have a high-level business travel experience, meaning a positive experience, isn't only being driven by travelers. Companies are seeing increased value in supporting measures to enhance the business travel experience, as it not only improves productivity and overall business outcomes, but it really supports talent attraction and retention. And finally, another interesting development, although on a much smaller scale, is an increased popularity globally for low-cost carriers, as well as premium economy options. To remain competitive, major carriers, such as those in the U.S., are responding in kind by offering greater levels of fare segmentations so that travelers can only pay for what they want and reduce the cost of the overall ticket. So, Tanya, that's what we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. And the way those two things may be sort of loggerheads with each other, low-cost travel and an increased user experience. So I can see how that could create some challenges for people managing corporate travel. Lena,
as I mentioned, absolutely does.
Sorry to jump straight to Lena, Sasha, but, as I mentioned in my introduction, we've seen this category really expand and, really cover the full end-to-end complexity of corporate travel. So when it comes to corporate travel management, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges facing procurement pros?
Hi, Tanya. Thanks. It's great to be here. And I think, like Sasha had mentioned, we had seen dramatic changes that technology is driving on the consumer side. And I think one of the implications is that consumers have different expectations. They expect online experiences, they expect on-demand services, and they actually changed the way they travel. They changed their habits. B2C habits are introduced in the corporate setting, which creates additional complexity for the travel managers. The reason being is it's also very significant hidden costs. Therefore, travel managers need to adapt their corporate solutions, and as a result, otherwise they will end up having more and more unmanaged rides, less and less processes in place, and they're also at the risk of losing a lot of data and control over their overall travel management.
And so, Lena, within the full breadth of the travel products and the services sits ground transportation, which is your specialisation. Tell us a little bit about that category, how it's matured and the issues that sit within it today.
Like we said before, I think one of the main things that has happened is the involvement and the impact from technology. Not long ago, all the bookings used to be done offline, and now we see more and more shift to the online space. Actually, majority of our bookings are done online, mostly driven by mobile bookings, something that not long ago wasn't the case. Another thing that we see happening is on-demand bookings, and the shift in consumers' expectations and their patience, really. Not long ago, 20-minute wait from an ASAP order to arrival would have been considered fast. Today, it's considered incredibly slow. In fact, we know that people often lose patience if they don't get a car assigned within 30 seconds. People expect their car to show up within 5 minutes from the booking. And I think this really impacts everything that we see in the travel space. We see that consumers expect to have quite a lot of visibility. They expect to have cars on demand. And travel managers and overall industry has to keep up with those expectations.
Yeah, and I think procurement's seeing that across the board. I think, I want it now, I want to see where it's coming, and I want it delivered basically to me, custom ordered. Now, we touched earlier about the concept of, total cost of ownership, and this is one of the biggest challenges facing procurement professionals, obviously, is not just to look at the one-off price, but the total cost of acquiring these products and services today. Could you, Lena, outline a little bit of the hidden costs and the other factors that are impacting travel, particularly in the area of ground transportation?
Of course, I think there are various hidden costs. One is definitely associated with unmanaged spend, but what I mean by unmanaged spend is when customers book on their own and then they expense manually those travel expenses. Some of the hidden costs there, or mainly efficiencies, are due to expense processing that is largely manual. However, this is not necessarily direct cost, but it is embedded in the payroll. This is something that you may potentially not be able to spot. Other more explicit costs are associated with long waiting times. For example, in airports, often customers book a car and their flight gets delayed, or they wait for a long time in the passport control. This could result in hours of wait that companies pay for. Another example would be when consumers, again, they book their own cars in a similar way to their B2C behaviors, which often use dynamic pricing. As a result, often the price goes up. And of course, corporates are the ones that are exposed to this risk. This would be another form of a hidden cost. Paying disproportionately expensive cost for a trip.
Well, talking of costs, we all know that there's a lot of maverick spend out there, across the board, but particularly in travel. And I guess, Sasha, I'd be interested to hear from you, why maverick spending is such a big problem, particularly in the area of ground transport, where I think, there's something like 65% of the total costs are unmanaged. And more than that, so what policies can teams implement and try and combat this maverick spend problem?
Well, I think part of the reason, and as it relates to ground transportation, is that very often it's an afterthought. While travelers are focused on air travel and hotel accommodation, they tend not to focus on the last mile, and that is the ground transportation. So in many circumstances, it just isn't considered as important as other considerations. But ground transportation, although often cheaper than other categories, should be managed as carefully as any other aspect of a travel policy. And one of the key reasons, as I see it, is traveler safety. We know from our research that traveling to unfamiliar cities can affect the well-being of business travelers. So frankly, traveling within a city should be just as important as travel to the city itself. And while car rental services are common in Europe and North America, in many cities in Asia, such as Singapore or Hong Kong, travelers are far more likely to travel by car service or taxi. And what this means is that the global ground transportation policy needs to take into consideration the varying methods of transport between countries and even within countries, cities. Another watch-out, and it's particular to ground transportation, is when travelers use personal booking tools that aren't necessarily visible to their employers. Similar to situations where travelers book hotels through non-company approved channels because they may appear cheaper, travelers also feel that they may be saving their company money when they book an Uber or a Lyft or a Get, for example, on their personal accounts. But the resulting lack of visibility on spend and the obstacles these creates with duty of care means really that the negatives outweigh the positives. So wherever possible, really encouraging bookings through corporate-approved channels will reduce this maverick spend.
Great point, Sasha. Now, Lena, what about you? What's your advice on maverick spend?
I think that in this context for us, I would like to talk about the travel policies. I think that in many organizations trust their employees to make the best decisions. And this is potentially fully justified trust, but it doesn't mean that they can actually do this. It is almost impossible to identify the best value option at any given moment. With so many pricing models on the market, the optimal choice can actually vary even by the hour, really. So with unmanaged spend, you have no control over the policy, the point of use, or vehicle type, and of course you're very vulnerable to dynamic pricing. It's actually much easier to enforce travel policy before the ride is taking place rather than after it.
Absolutely, and I know we're going to be talking about safety a bit later as well, which is a really important element of this. Why don't we change gears a little bit and start talking about technology? And as you know, on Procurious, we talk a lot about AI, Internet of Things, blockchain, and other innovative technologies coming our way and transforming the way procurement professionals work around the world. Lena, perhaps if we start with you, what technologies are you seeing that are impacting business travel, and how are they helping to address some of the challenges that we've been discussing so far?
Sure. I think that if we start with AI, it really helps us with our operations. We use AI a lot, to match our supply and demand, to optimize our operational performance for both our drivers and riders. This would be one example. Of course, another one is analytics. We use advanced analytics to set up those travel policies that we talked about, and also to provide full visibility. This includes advanced reporting, and also really learning consumer behaviors and helping our partners and clients to optimize their spend and to set the right policies in place, and also to identify sources of spend. I think this would be the main applications. And of course, there are some others in the market, including, you mentioned, the Internet of Things. So one example for that would be the fact that now passengers can order a vehicle with voice or other accessibility options, which can be vital for employees that are not fully sighted, for example. So there are different applications from technology standpoint that really help us improve in this place.
And what about you, Sasha, from your perspective? How are these Industry 4.0 changes impacting travel category?
Yeah, in a huge way. So I've been speaking a lot recently, actually, about the way digitization has impacted business travel, and it's something that we are really heavily investing in American Express Global Business Travel. So we've seen that AI is having significant benefits as the travel industry as a whole, and at GBT we're implementing it in multiple areas where the true value of our services has historically been somewhat diminished by laborious manual processes. So one brief example is a tool that we offer called Hotel Reshop, and that constantly monitors room rates following a hotel booking and can automatically trigger a rebooking when a like-for-like room with the same amenities in the property becomes available at a lower rate. Instant savings for a corporation, but no deterioration in the experience for the traveler. Digitization of business travel has also opened up greater data analytics capabilities. Our data and analytics platform, which is a repository that houses more than 6 years of data, drives our reporting and analytics tools. As I mentioned earlier, one thing that corporate travelers are looking at now is really the consumerization of business travel. Business travelers expect to have access to tools and technologies that mirror their consumer travel experience. And key to this is the Know Me technology. That's the KNOW, Know Me experience. As a traveler, you want the service provider to have a deep understanding of your profile, anticipate needs, pre-populate fields intelligently and display the most relevant options to you, because that's what we get in our personal lives. And even with all of these tools, Tanya, we're really still in the early stages of seeing how far digitization can go in terms of personalizing the travel experience.
Well, yes, I wanted to ask you about implementation of these technologies, but maybe before I do, I'll share this little, I'm probably way behind the 8 ball here, but I saw some of the cruise liners now issuing these little medallions that sort of help with the know me aspect. So before you hop on your cruise, you can give all your preferences, the favourite drinks, I don't know what you put in there. And it's actually a wearable. And I was just wanting to ask you both, could this have broader applications for corporate travel, this sort of wearable technology that knows all the users, or will our smartphones and other devices already capture that? Maybe Sasha, if you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah. So I think to a large extent this actually already exists. It may not exist in the wearable form of technology, although that does exist in a lot of meetings and events, large meetings and events now. People can download preferences onto corporate apps that they do hold in their phone, not around their person, or they could hold it around their person in a lanyard with a QR code that does customize to their preferences. But even in our day-to-day lives, this really already exists, this Know Me technology. And while it may not be immediately apparent, individual customer preferences are already stored in almost all of the online tools that we use. So, for example, if you're a user and you visit an online store regularly on the same device, so if your profile indicates that you're a non-smoker, you will only be offered non-smoking rooms or in non-smoking properties. And all of these digital enhancements are beneficial to the user experience. But being a lawyer, I have to call one thing out. The only caveat, the only caution that I would mention to tools such as this is privacy risk. It's crucial that the individual's right to privacy is not diminished through these innovations. So whenever developing tools like this, whenever customizing highly based on individual data and individual preferences, it's important to stay on the right side of digital technologies that enhance the traveler experience, but don't diminish privacy rights while doing so. And it's not really just that it's a legal requirement, because of course it is. It's a mandatory legal requirement. But clients and travelers expect this to be the case. They expect our privacy to be rigorously protected, but still demand the same level of customization.
Thank you. Great answer, Sasha, and some great issues raised there. Maybe if I just jump back to the question I was going to ask about technology before we move on, and that's about how companies are implementing technologies. Lena, maybe if we hear first from you, how do you think procurement should onboard their organisation, and how do we communicate the value add and, improvement of compliance?
Well, I think that in our case, the key to successful onboarding is user satisfaction. I think that when employees are happy with the service that they're provided with, this becomes a very smooth process. So what we do is usually have our staff that helps our clients with every aspect of user adoption. We spend time on the client side and ensure that people have a really great experience. It's ultimately about education and really showing them the value. And I think that implementation is vital for a successful partnership, so it needs to be an essential part of the product rollout and part of the process. Because successful implementation usually leads to increase in the user adoption, which means higher level of control, higher level of visibility, more data that is available, and therefore, in our case, it usually leads to more savings, better travel policies in place, higher compliance, and also budgetary control.
Sasha, what about you? Any advice on how people should roll out these new technologies?
So I think what you have to do is, first of all, just to piggyback on what Lena said, the onboarding experience is crucial, and we find that in our business, not so much with onboarding technologies, but just onboarding customers. If the onboarding experience is poor, it will really color the user's experience of our whole servicing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what's important when onboarding new technology like this is really to demonstrate the value add to the business. So yes, it can be very difficult to onboard a new technology and it can be disruptive. But if people keep in mind what the value add is, then they will forgive a little bit of disruption. And in the case of, say, a travel technology such as that we offer or that Get offers, one thing to keep in mind, a huge value add, is duty of care. So by implementing tools and technology that monitor, control, and oversee travelers, we're really, really fostering duty of care. We're innovating and assisting companies in their ability to improve both safety and well-being of their travelers. And the other thing to remember in the value add is that tools like this really can add to the bottom line of a company, which of course everyone sees the value in. So if we think back to, for example, the tool that I mentioned about Hotel Reshop, where it searches for less costly hotel rooms that don't minimize the consumer experience, the same things exist for air travel. And when we keep that in mind during the onboarding process, duty of care, safety of employees, for example, and cost saving, that really minimizes the burden of onboarding technologies, which don't always go to plan.
Yes, and I'm glad that you raised the issue of safety, because it's certainly something for me as I travel around the world that I'm really, conscious of, and I know a lot of large companies are very conscious of, and of course they all want to protect their employees. So Sasha, could you talk a little bit more about how tech can help us, improve transparency and mitigate risk with business travel?
Yeah, so when it comes to improving, let's talk about improving transparency and then mitigate risk. So
okay.
Transparency, one of the core benefits of technology, as I see it, in travel is transparency. Primarily, this is really through the advanced data analytics that technology can offer, both in the data analytics and reporting tools. In previous years, it was very difficult for travel managers to obtain a clear, overarching picture of their travel data spend, but now reporting tools provide powerful analytics and dynamic dashboards that promote transparency and mitigate risks, and that is freely available. With the use of such tools, procurement officers are able to analyze their travel programs really in great detail. But these tools now go well beyond simple data analytics and reporting. We're now offering transparency tools that target discrete areas of travel management, not the overall program, but very specific areas of leakage. So for example, there's a tool that can identify out-of-policy bookings before they take place, and this prevents cost leakage and fosters duty of care. If a traveler chooses to fly on a carrier, for example, that a corporation's deemed unsafe, the tool will prevent the travel from taking place. Or if the traveler has booked an out-of-policy or non-preferred hotel, the individual will be rebooked. We've even developed unique processes for tracking, refunding, and reporting forgotten ticket values, such as unused or canceled tickets. And these are cost-saving opportunities that really aren't overlooked. They are really overlooked by organizations because they're really hard to track.
Yeah.
In terms of duty of care, this is where technology really, really is beneficial to an independent corporate traveler. So now we're seeing tools that have been developed that enable travelers to be tracked and contacted during travel disruption. For example, a weather event or an incident of terrorism. And this makes sure that the traveler feels valued and looked after, and potentially even allows their family to know that they're safe. And these tools go unappreciated until, of course, you need them.
Yeah.
And then in addition to safety, so tracking travelers in times of crisis, we have other tools that analyze travel itineraries against potential events such as weather disruptions. And these make recommendations on whether booking is required. So even before you get to the airport, you can know that, you know what, your trip's going to be delayed, so we will rebook you at a later time so you can complete your trip. And these can make all the difference for the well-being and productivity of business travelers.
Yeah. And I mean, with the issue of ground transportation, you know, really we know when people landed at a specific airport, but that period between where they land and when they get to their hotel is really like, a big black hole because, we really don't know how people are getting to their hotel. And I think one of the surveys that get provided us with in preparation for this showed that 54% of corporates don't even have any restriction on taxi travel. So it really is a big issue. Lena, did you want to comment any further on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like I mentioned before, with travel policies, those are very difficult to implement, and most companies do have them in place. And I think that from what we've seen, most consumers are actually, they want to do the right thing, but it's almost impossible, especially when they travel, because they don't really know. So if you don't have a tool that guides them towards what is the better policy, it's very difficult, even in your own home and hometown, given the different pricing models and the fact that sometimes your cheapest option can be the most expensive one if there is a lot of traffic or if something happens outside. It's very difficult to know. But if you travel abroad or if you land somewhere else, it's almost impossible. Yeah.
And Lena, while we've got you on a roll there, I mean, what about this idea of the service? Maybe if we change gears again off from safety and compliance to meeting customers or employees' demand. Like you've said, in our personal lives, we're very spoiled. We, can order from our grocery provider, our fashion provider. It's very easy. Same for ordering taxis in our personal life, and nobody's going to wait 30 or 40 minutes anymore. Now, when we're at work, we're expecting the same sort of service. So how can corporations deliver this same high quality and personalised service on a global scale?
Delivering the same quality and the same level of personalization at the global scale is extremely challenging. There are several companies that work on those solutions, including us, of course. And I think the key to this is really considering how do we combine both very complex operations with advanced technology, and at the same time we need to be able to incorporate all the systems and the legacy in the process while we still prioritize the safety of our employees. One of the things that we need to consider is global insurances. We need to think about the duty of care and what is the supply chain that we're working with abroad, and how do we provide all the tools and the visibility and utilize our technology to really ensure that not only the experience is consistent, both on the operational side and on the tech side, but at the same time we still use advanced technology to implement similar travel policies and to provide a standardized experience for our clients and their employees.
Fantastic. I know that it must be big challenges for corporates to change all their systems and approaches to catch up with the consumer marketing side of things. Now, maybe if we switch gears again to sustainability, and Sasha, I'm going to throw this one to you. On Procurious, we're talking a lot about procurement with purpose, which covers a broad range of issues. But when we think of travel, I think we all think of sustainability as a specific subset of procurement with purpose. And I was sort of talking at a conference in the US last week about, these things have minefields and daisy fields. The minefields are the things that sort of blow up and get us on the the headline news about things we're not managing well, but sort of the daisy fields are these things where we can really improve our brand and our employee value proposition really as well for companies by managing sustainability well. We've got some great examples. Big brands like ASOS recently introduced 100% electric vehicles for the final leg of customer service, and we know other large car companies have pledged to make all their cars fully electric. Sasha, what are your thoughts on all of this? How have you seen sustainability come to the forefront of global travel?
Well, in global travel, and particularly in air travel, we're still a long way off from being a leader in the overall sustainability conversation. But what we are seeing from our clients is a much greater interest in partnering at least with suppliers with responsible business practices. So what we're seeing is the decision to be more selective with suppliers that, for example, are demonstrating a clear commitment to sustainability will have an increasingly significant impact on business relationships. And this will become more important of a consideration as suppliers such as hotels or ground transportation realize that they need to make meaningful changes in order to remain competitive. And what these changes could range. So from hotels using green certified laundries to wash linen, or to ground transportation suppliers offering hybrid or electric cars. So there are a variety of options or ways that we can see this sustainability conversation moving forward. At GBT, we've also renewed our focus on sustainability. We've recently evolved our own corporate social responsibility initiative to demonstrate our growing commitment. And it's interesting, small things even internally that we've implemented, including measures to remove single-use plastics and styrofoam, replacing them with glasses and dishes in pantries, are hugely popular, and they resonate both with employees and clients alike. So it's not for lack of intent, but I just think the travel industry as a whole has a long way to go in terms of being a leader in the sustainability business.
Actually, Lena, that's something that I wanted to raise with you. You know, we've heard about air miles, we've heard about food miles, but we don't hear about taxi miles. Why do you think sustainability in transport is so important today, and what measures can organisations take to improve their sustainability efforts?
Well, actually, Jet was the first transportation company in Europe to offset its carbon footprint and become fully carbon neutral. So we care a lot about sustainability. And on the B2C side, we actually run special projects with our communities in London. And we bring forward some of the green initiatives, including our users who can optionally pay 20p extra per ride. And this will be used for air quality measures in London's primary schools. This is an initiative that is currently running for our consumers, and we're working actively on bringing this into the B2B space as well.
Great. Well, look, we're coming to a close shortly with our conversation. It's been so great. I mean, we've covered so many issues, and I think this is one of the great things about being a procurement professional today is you've got to think about all these things, you know, safety, sustainability, total cost of ownership. So I guess, what's your advice? And maybe if we start with you, Lena, how do people go about choosing their best ground transportation provider?
I would say that employees and user satisfaction are a priority, as they're the ones who need to use the service every day. Yes. So my recommendation would be partnering with suppliers who really focus on quality, on safety, on the user experience. I would say that also look for partners that help you solve the key pain points, take away most of the headache. Ultimately, the spend in this vertical is relatively low compared to some others. So to some other issues the travel managers really have on their agenda. While the complexity is quite high, so I would suggest to keep looking for partners that will solve those problems and take away most of the pain and keep your employees happy, really.
Sasha, what's your advice to people looking to provide, to select, I should say, their ground transportation provider?
To select their ground transportation provider, I would say that the advice doesn't really differ from selecting any travel supplier. So, is the ground transportation provider able to negotiate rates? Are they able to demonstrate their safety and security mechanism? It really doesn't differ. So what we have to do is first have a strong understanding of the key cities that the travelers visit most frequently and choose suppliers based on those cities. If you have a global program, it may make sense to partner with one or more ground transportation provider. If you already have data around your ground transportation spend, you can use this data to engage suppliers and negotiate the best rates and appropriate services that suit the needs of your business. Again, no different from any other aspect of the travel spend. The other consideration, in addition to cost and global availability, is reputation, safety, and customer service. And key to ground transportation, which is unique to ground transportation, is can the provider be immediately reachable in case of accident? And then there are other add-ons, again, that are unique to ground transportation that can be attractive. So, for example, can cars be delivered to a traveler's hotel, or can individuals be dropped off at an airport upon vehicle return? Things like this. But otherwise, really selecting a ground transportation provider, the principles shouldn't differ from any other travel supplier selection.
Wonderful. Great tips. Not always easy, but to implement, but those are definitely great pieces of advice. Maybe if we now, for our last question, take it back up to the macro, and, this is a sort of a big question, but what does the future hold? What do you think that procurement pros managing this travel category, or ground transportation in particular, but travel as a whole, what predictions do you have and advice to our listeners on this category? Sasha, maybe if we start with you again.
Yeah, so for procurement professionals in travel, once you've negotiated your rates and travel policies with suppliers, the biggest challenge is actually knowing that the program is running well. So the heavy lift is done, negotiating your policies, negotiating your rates, but then how do you carry that forward and know that your travelers are traveling to compliance and that your program is running according to as it should? And having the ability to review accurate and timely metrics on the success of your program is something that procurement managers should expect nowadays. This will enable the procurement professionals to understand which individuals or which business divisions are failing to maintain appropriate levels of travel policy compliance, and really any other area where there's room for improvement or greater savings, such as those discrete areas of savings that I mentioned earlier that don't always come to top of mind. In the meantime, it's important that businesses are communicating effectively with their traveling staff about why travel policy compliance is important, not just in terms of driving the best savings, but also to ensure and support traveler safety and well-being.
I love it. So nothing too crazy and out there. It all comes down to managing it well, and of course the data. It's all about having the data and being able to analyse utilisation trends and maximise the contract. So, very sound. And Lena, what about you? What's your advice about the future?
I think that we can expect that the technology will continue evolving and shaping consumer expectations. I think we can probably expect similar trends to continue, and even potentially some of the technologies will converge and take user experience to the next level. So my advice would be to keep evolving with the technology and keeping an eye on employees' needs and their priorities and habits. At the same time, keeping them safe, especially when they travel abroad or they're far away, it's still corporate responsibility to make sure that everything goes well with them while their needs are met. So my advice would be to continue monitoring on the same trend and shaping and partnering with, in the B2B space, with providers that meet the needs of the employees in the same level.
I love it. Real customer focus on what your employees actually want, as well as them being safe. Well, Lena and Sasha, thank you both so much for your time today. It's been a fantastic conversation about, as I said, this very emotional category. And I really hope you, our listeners, have enjoyed the discussion, and we look forward to speaking again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.